welcome to this week's tutorial. Today I'm back working on George here, the fluffy tortoiseshell again. There's a few areas in here which I think will be really useful for making a tutorial on. And one of those is the next part, which I'm going to do is adding in his whiskers. And doing that I'm going to use an etching tool, or an embossing tool, whichever you want to call it, which is basically just a sharp pointed tool that you use to indent the paper. They're mainly used for pottery, so they're not technically a drawing tool. I think you can get special drawing ones, but the one that I use, which I didn't get out, is this one. I use this guy, and I use this end, which has got the really fine ball point on the end there. It's really sharp and it's good for doing whiskers. I have a variety of them with different ends for different sized drawings. So if I've got a larger scale drawing, like a 14 by 14 inch say, I will use a fatter end. But on a smaller drawing like this, I use the skinny end, plus it's really sharp and really pointy to get right in there in the paper. So that's what we're going to do today. It's just going to be a short tutorial, basically just explaining this technique and how I do whiskers and fine hairs. This one's also going to be up on YouTube, so patrons will get first access to it, but YouTubers will get access to it also at a later date. So, just going to use this tool. So all we're going to do is erase the whiskers, which I've drawn in my graphite pencil here. So you just gently erase. Just going to erase all of this side so then I can add all of those in. So, gently erasing, not too much. I still want to be able to actually see the whisker line, make sure I get them right, so not erasing them entirely, just so they're ever so faint. So we have our whiskers erased. You can just slightly see them. I'm not sure if they're going to come through very well on the camera, but they're ever so slightly erased there. So I'm just looking at my reference picture of George, and then I'm just going to make sure that I've actually drawn the whiskers in the right place to begin with, because I don't want to get them wrong. And then using the very fine tip of my embossing tool or etching tool, I'm just going to use one continuous stroke across the paper to indent this whisker. So I'm going to do this one that actually comes out and down. So one continuous line, and I try and make it flow. I'm just using the embossing tool like I would use a pencil, just holding it like a pencil and just putting medium sort of pressure onto it to indent the paper nicely. If you have thicker whiskers, like I said, you can use a thicker end, or if you've got a whisker where one end is thicker, you can do your fine line first and then go over the base with the thicker end to make the base of the whisker thicker than the very tip. But there's our first whisker. Then we're going to add the second one. So he's got one that comes out from here, just below this other one. So again, one continuous line, and then flicking it out towards the end where it's nice and fine. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for the rest of the whiskers. Just following my graphite line and then making sure that I've got it right on my reference photo as well. Because once you've added this, you can't erase it, so you need to make sure that you've got it 100% correct and proper, yeah. Just need to make sure you get it 100% correct the first time, because there is no undo on this embossing tool. You can't erase the line or anything. So adding all of these little, they get smaller as they go round, so not quite as long concentrated lines. So that's almost all of the whiskers. A couple more here and there. And that's that side done. So now we're going to go ahead and do the opposite side. So doing exactly the same, just erasing those initial lines. And then taking the embossing tool and just making those lines again. This side is a little fatter, so what I am going to do is use the other end just to make the very base of those whiskers a little thicker than the very tips. So first of all, I'm going to use my thinnest end. So one continuous line, add the others in. Adding them all in, so erase that because I forgot to. And then add in some of these fine lines around his mouth as well. And then I'm going to take the other end, which is ever so slightly thicker than this end, and then at the very base, just on these three whiskers at the top, I'm just going to go over the base of those whiskers with the larger end of my embossing tool. And it makes the very ends where they meet the cheek fur, it just makes them a little bit thicker. And I will just do this for this side. And that's basically it. That's how I create my whiskers and fine lines on portraits. I used to use a white pencil, but that technique wasn't really the best. I was looking back at some of my older work where I had used my embossing tool, and some of the newer work where I was using a white pencil to indent the paper, and the quality difference was significant. It was so much better when I was using the embossing tool rather than the white pencil. So I made the switch to go back to the embossing tool, and it's the best. It's a good decision. When I'm drawing fine lines, you've got tiny little hairs that you can't really replicate very easily with a white pencil. I just use the exact same technique. I take my embossing tool, the very finest tip that I can find, and then I just make the hairs on my piece. I don't use as long concentrated strokes, I just use little short strokes like you would if you're drawing a top layer of fur. So, for instance, around his eye here, there are a few tiny little white hairs which I'm going to find difficult. So what I will do is just take my embossing tool and just make some very short indentations into the paper. And again on this side, I just make very, very short indentations, very quick strokes to replicate the fur texture. And that's basically all I do. And I do exactly the same if I have a piece of fur or coat that has like little circular speckles in it. I will use a thicker end, so like this one, of my embossing tool, and I will just indent the paper like that. So I will just push down, make those little indentations. It's going to be so much easier than going back over with my white pencil and finding it difficult. So that's how I do everything, and it's just a quick little tutorial on how to replicate fine hairs and whiskers easily without mashing your white pencils and adding loads and loads of layers. So this is the best technique, the best way that I have found to do these types of hairs. So hopefully this is quite helpful to you guys, and I will see you in the next short little quick tutorial video. Bye!